समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Last night, Pakistan carried out airstrikes on Kabul reportedly. And this was widely reported across regional media, especially the Pakistani media. And this coincided with acting Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi's visit to India. Now, it seems Pakistan meant to send a signal to both New Delhi and Kabul. So, while several Pakistani outlets have rushed to claim that the chief of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan was among those targeted, there remains no confirmation so far. But what is certain, however, is that Pakistan's TTP problem and fixation are far from over. So, in the shadow of these developments, India's engagement with Taliban-controlled Afghanistan stands out as one of quiet persistence. Since the fall of the Ashraf Ghani government and the chaotic US withdrawal, New Delhi has consciously blurred its erstwhile red lines regarding engagement with the Taliban regime. Now, over this year alone, there have been visible attempts to ramp up contact and engagement, showing an evolution from guarded detachment to cautious pragmatism. And this shift gains sharper relevance today when juxtaposed with the steady deterioration in Pakistan-Afghanistan relations. Rawalpindi's attempt to build a united Islamic front against India has faltered in the last few years, exposing the limits of Pakistan's influence over the Taliban it once nurtured. Now, for the Taliban, that is eager for recognition and legitimacy and is playing all sides, regional diplomacy has become essential. So, as Afghanistan re-emerges as a theatre for competing geopolitical and economic ambitions, every major and middle power, think of it, China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, all these seek to maintain strategic depth there. The United States as well is showing renewed interest, with Donald Trump's inclination to revive the Bagram Air Base, a proposition that New Delhi and others have opposed via the Moscow format consultations. So the natural question here is, why does Afghanistan matter so much? Afghanistan holds enduring significance for India on at least three broad counts. First, as a counterbalance to China's growing presence in the region, Beijing's pursuit of entrenching a China-Pakistan-Afghanistan trilateral framework and its attempts to fold Kabul into the broader China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or the CPEC project, represent a direct challenge to India's connectivity strategy. By diverting Afghanistan's maritime trade from Karachi to Gwadar, China seeks to deepen Afghan dependence on Pakistan's infrastructure, undercutting India's long-standing efforts to offer Kabul alternative routes through Chabahar Port and the International North-South Transport Corridor, or the INSTC. Now, despite sanction-related complications and shifting US waivers, especially under Donald Trump, Chabahar remains crucial for India's vision to integrate Afghanistan into a wider web of connectivity. Now, while India lacks China's financial and strategic heft, it benefits from the Taliban's desire to hedge against over-reliance on Pakistan. Remember, I told you, Taliban is also playing all sides. In this equation, India's continued engagement with Moscow and Tehran is also quite relevant. Second, engagement with Kabul serves as an instrument to blunt Pakistan's attempt to internationalize the Kashmir issue or foment terrorism in the region. Maintaining a degree of strategic depth in Afghanistan, even through cautious diplomacy, offers India both intelligence leverage and regional relevance. And third, landlocked Afghanistan is India's gateway to energy-rich Central Asia. Access to these markets is vital for India's long-term energy security and economic ambitions, reflected through the push for INSTC that goes via the Central Asian region. Now, without an Afghan land bridge, India's continental strategy remains incomplete. Now, these are the obvious imperatives, and I'm sure you have heard them before. And yet beneath them lies a deeper analytical challenge. How should India interpret and respond to a continually unstable Pakistan and a region defined by competing, overlapping alignments? Now, Pakistan's internal contradictions, the Pashtun and Baloch questions, foremost among them, will continue to fester but are unlikely to lead to outright state fragmentation or what is referred to as balkanization. Both issues intersect directly with Chinese strategic interests. Beijing has invested heavily in stabilizing these fault lines, knowing that instability in Pakistan's border regions endangers the China-Pakistan economic corridor and the safety of Chinese personnel there. Pakistan's deep economic and military dependence on China, which is growing, ensures that in the long run, the unification of Pashtun populations on either side of the Durand line will remain incomplete. Similarly, now let's talk about the Baloch insurgency that straddles the Iran-Pakistan border, a frontier nearly 900 kilometers long. Now, despite recent cross-border strikes between Tehran and Islamabad, both have since signed ambitious trade and defense agreements, an outcome again backed by Chinese economic influence in both capitals. Iran, increasingly cornered by Israel's intensifying rampage against its proxy network and a weakened Russia bogged down in Ukraine, find itself relying more and more on Chinese investments and even weapons. Now, Delhi's strategic establishment must recognize that when the next Iran-Israel confrontation unfolds, China will likely emerge as a quiet but decisive player behind the scenes, even if not completely visibly. For Beijing, Afghanistan's stability is not merely a matter of influence and trade. It is also a security imperative. The Islamic State Khorasan province, the ISKP, poses a direct threat to Xinjiang, making the maintenance of depth in Afghanistan a non-negotiable objective for China. Now, while Russia's interests overlap with China's in this regard, on the other hand, its engagement with the Taliban through the Moscow format also offers India a diplomatic cushion. The question, however, is how far the deepening Moscow-Beijing partnership might, over time, constrain India's maneuverability, and how close is such a situation for New Delhi? So Afghanistan remains a region that is perpetually in strategic flux. And let me here explain a bit more. Several regional dynamics add layers and layers of complexity. The US designation of the Balochistan Liberation Army, the BLA, as a terrorist organization, a full terrorist organization, for instance, plays into Pakistan's narrative. Meanwhile, the region's shadow economy, driven by opium, other drugs, Iranian diesel, Russian arms, and human trafficking, all of this continues to thrive, largely untouched by the grand geopolitics swirling above it. Now let's talk about another actor, Turkey. Turkey has also become an increasingly active player. Since Erdogan came to power in 2002, Ankara has sought to use Afghanistan as a strategic lever for greater autonomy in global politics. After the US withdrawal, Turkey, just like China, has moved swiftly to fill parts of that vacuum. Now, fast forward to this year. In June, Amir Muttaqi met Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan on the sidelines of the OIC, or Organization of Islamic Countries, Foreign Ministers meeting in Istanbul, signaling growing cooperation. The thing is that Ankara shares with Beijing a concern over ISKP's expanding reach. The group's strong connections with Central Asian radical networks have made Turkey a transit hub for migrants from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, particularly vulnerable. Some Turkish cities, notably Istanbul's Basaksehir district, have even become centers for these immigrant communities and, by extension, for potential radicalization. Now, all this underscores the same reality. The old scramble for influence and strategic depth in Afghanistan is gaining new grounds. Traditionally, Iran and Russia have represented relatively friendly alignments for India, while China, Pakistan, and Turkey have posed varying degrees of hostility. But the emerging geopolitics of the region is far less bifurcated. Now, what do I mean when I say less bifurcated? Cross-cutting interests, overlapping agendas, and situational alignments have replaced clear blocks. Now, this fluidity is both an opportunity and a constraint for India. So, India needs to go beyond multi-alignment, and what I'm making here is a case for compartmentalization. In this environment I just told you about, India's challenge is not one of relevance, but of clarity. New Delhi must retain its strategic resilience and ability to hedge, adapt, and recalibrate without losing coherence. India has often been described as a practitioner of multi-alignment, a foreign policy of engaging all sides without really committing exclusively to any. And yet, multi-alignment, though elegant in theory, risks becoming an end unto itself rather than a means, and also risks becoming counterproductive. What we refer to as multi-alignment can easily devolve into a posture of cautious ambiguity rather than active strategy. So my argument is, what India needs, therefore, is compartmentalization. And the difference is that compartmentalization is a more disciplined approach to managing multiple and even contradictory relationships. Compartmentalization involves subtracting issues from a comprehensive negotiation and treating them as separate domains. It allows policymakers to cooperate on shared challenges without broader concessions, to manage contradictions without paralysis or delayed responding. Successful compartmentalization then requires identifying not just multiple interests, but also their hierarchy and differentiation. The current world order defies clear demarcations. There are no stable power blocks, no unambiguous security guarantors. The United States, by design, no longer seeks to play that role, and no other power, China including, can yet replace it fully. So India's foreign policy must therefore evolve from reactive balancing to structured agility, the capacity to engage competitors, partners, and rivals alike through clearly defined issue-based frameworks. So, do we need to rethink India's strategic vocabulary? The interconnected theaters of today, spanning the Indo-Pacific, Central Asia, and Middle East, and so on, bear little resemblance to the world India navigated during the Cold War or even the early years of post-Cold War unipolarity. The anticipated, that means what everybody expected. Now, the anticipated contours of a multipolar world fail to capture the chaotic simultaneity of crises and alignments that define our times today. For India, anodyne multi-alignment is no longer enough. It must be refined, calibrated, and compartmentalized, anchored in a clearer understanding of what to prioritize, when to engage, and where to draw lines. Afghanistan in this calculus is not just a theatre of competition, but a testing ground for India's ability to pursue such a reworked foreign policy. The ultimate goal is not merely the risk-averse approach of keeping all options open, but to benefit from the options available, to turn strategic uncertainty into strategic leverage. Now, to sum up, India's engagement with Taliban-controlled Afghanistan is, on balance, a net positive. It keeps channels open, counters rival influence, and sustains regional relevance. But this engagement operates within tight constraints: overlapping rivalries, internal Afghan volatility, and a fluid international order, especially under Donald Trump. To navigate this landscape, India must move from the rhetoric of multi-alignment to the practice of compartmentalization, managing contradictions with precision and advancing its interests through a more coherent, issue-driven diplomacy. In a world where every alignment is partial and every partnership transactional, that may be the only sustainable strategy for a nation of India's scale and ambition. And I'll be back to discuss more on this. Stay tuned.